Hey everyone. So this is our last chapter, which is the reproductive system. I'm going to cut it down and make it as short and sweet as possible, since the end of the year has come faster than expected. So when we look at the reproductive system, we obviously have two different systems between males and females. But just by looking at the pictures, you can kind of see that they're very, very similar in structure, but functionality-wise, they're very, very different. So if you want to look at a replication between the two, or symbiosis of the two of them, your eggs in females are made from ovaries, and the sperm are made in the testes. So if you kind of take the male reproductive system and move the testes up, it almost looks very similar to the female. You do have a pathway for the sperm to travel, something called the vas deferens, and for females, you have your uterine or fallopian tubes that come on down, and then it gets a little bit different after that part, but you can see that they're both structurally kind of similar, but they've changed due to the hormones between males and females. So for males, the gonads are the testes, that's where your sperm comes from, and for females, it's the ovaries, and that's where an ova or an egg comes from. And then everything else outside of that are called accessory organs for reproduction. So they're not where the egg or the sperm is being produced. We're going to start with the female reproductive system. We'll kind of move through that as much as we possibly can. We'll probably go through the anatomy of it today. So you have your ovaries, and that's where your eggs are produced. And for females, there's the phrase that all females are born with all of their eggs, and that's pretty much true. There's minimal that's made during your life. So you're born with millions of eggs, and they slowly get destroyed. Some of them do not form, and we'll look at the numbers in a little bit. So your ovaries are held in place by ligaments. You have ligaments all over the place, holding the ovaries in place, that holds the uterus in place, just so it doesn't move around that much. Okay, and then we get inside an ovary. And inside of the ovary, it goes through a pretty lengthy cycle to produce an egg. It can take approximately 80 days to produce an egg, actually. Some shorter, some a little bit longer, but out of that, you only are releasing one egg per month once you hit puberty as a female. So your ovaries, before you hit puberty, they are actually producing immature eggs, and then those eggs fizzle out because you don't have enough of the hormones pumping throughout your body to actually produce an egg. So we'll look at the numbers again, but you produce about 30 new possible eggs per day. They're called follicles. So inside of a follicle, you're going to have a possible egg forming. And then as the days of the month go along, if that one egg is large enough to be released and mature enough, it gets released on what usually is like day 14, which is your ovulation day. But we'll talk about that. So these follicles mature, they become larger and larger, as you see here. They get larger and larger and larger. And then when it's, if it's that perfect timing of the month, that one egg gets released into the fallopian tube, and it will make its way to the uterus. The follicle then becomes this thing called the corpus luteum. So a follicle is just holding an egg, and if it matures enough and it's perfect timing with that day of ovulation, it will release that egg. If not, then it would just fizzle out and it would deteriorate inside the body. So here's those crazy numbers. Females lose 11,000 oocytes every month prior to puberty. So you're born with a lot of eggs, and you lose a lot every month from pretty much when you're born, somewhere around there. Females lose 1,000 oocytes every month after puberty. You have approximately, they say some people have 500,000 oocytes when puberty starts, and you produce approximately 30 eggs at the start of every day. So once you hit puberty, you're producing 30 eggs in 30 different follicles, and over an 85-day period, those eggs will start to mature, but only one of those eggs, possibly even one of those eggs, will be released because the timing has to be perfect. So you could think of it, let's say on January 1st, a female starts producing 30 follicles with an egg in each one. On January 2nd, those first follicles are growing, but on the second, you are now producing another 30 follicles with an egg in each of them. And then on January 3rd, same thing. So that's going to take, it's going to take an 85-day maturation from, let's say, January 1st. So it'll take 85 days. And then on January 2nd, when these new eggs are being formed, they take 85 days. So when those 85 days are up, one of those eggs may be released from the ovary if it lands perfectly on that day of ovulation. If it doesn't, well then it just deteriorates, it gets broken down, and your body rids it as need be. Okay, so it's all about timing, and that's why the genes that are passed on, it is a pretty much a one in a over a million shot of the gene combination inside of an egg, which has made you who you are, in completion with the sperm as well. So you have a lot to start with, but this is the reason why once puberty hits, you only have a set amount of time for pregnancy or to become pregnant, because you do start to lose oocytes or eggs, possible eggs, as you grow older. So once a woman hits about the age of 40, her chances of becoming pregnant greatly decrease. After the age of 35, they decrease. After the age of 40, they greatly decrease. And then getting closer to 50, you're not producing enough possible eggs, meaning the follicles are not going to be able to grow, and your hormones start to change as well. Okay, so from the ovary, the egg is released into the fallopian tube. The fallopian tube actually does not connect with the ovary. It almost like, so if this is the ovary, the fallopian tube has these fingers called fimbria, and they kind of just sweep that egg. So when that egg is released, it's going to try to sweep it into the fallopian tube. And there have been times when an egg has not gone up the fallopian tube, and it just floats outside and nothing happens. Or there's been crazy times where a sperm has swam all the way up there, connected with an egg, and then that egg has actually fallen back out of the ovary, and it implants into the abdominal side wall or something like that. That's very, very rare, but it has happened. So that egg is released, and it's moved down the fallopian tube by these little fingers. You can see these little like cilia, and they're gonna push that egg towards the uterus, and that takes about 3 or 4 days to get it all the way down there. But when that egg is released, it takes about, or it only has about 24 hours to become fertilized. So when that egg is released, if sperm is in the fallopian tube, or if it's going to be there soon, within 24 hours, you will have fertilization. After that, the chances of fertilization greatly decrease because the egg actually starts to degenerate. So there has to be fertilization within those first 24 hours, or approximately within those first 24 hours. Okay. So from the fallopian tube, you then come into the uterus, and the uterus is where that fertilized egg is going to implant. It's going to implant into the, what we call the endometrium, sorry. And that endometrium is a thickened tissue, and if that egg is fertilized, it will implant. If the egg is not fertilized, it will just kind of roll around in there for a couple days, and then it will be released later on during menses, or during what we call your period. So the egg is released. It is fertilized here, all the way up in the fallopian tube. Takes another 2 to 3 days to come down here. It starts rolling around in here. And then after a couple more days, maybe on day 6 or 7, it finally implants into that endometrium, or that thickened uterine wall. And then the body starts to go through these crazy changes with hormones. Okay. So with the uterus, you have what's called the fundus, the body. We don't really hear about them much, but you do hear about the cervix, and the cervix is right here. It's that area. And the cervix is important because when the baby starts to form, and it starts to get time towards delivery, the head of the baby will usually start to push on that cervix. And this is when they talk about in the hospitals, what's the dilation of the cervix? So is it at 0 or is it at 10 or anywhere in between that? And once it gets up to 10, when the cervix is dilated to 10, that means that you're probably going to start pushing really soon, and they're going to be expecting this baby any minute or within the next few minutes. So the cervix is really looked at for that. Other than that, they don't really look at it too much during pregnancy. Okay, just to finish up with the uterus, you have your linings. You have the endometrium, which is this thickened area. You have the myometrium, which is the muscle. So the myometrium stands for muscle contraction, and that's only really used during delivery, and it moves in a rhythmic motion. So it squeezes from the top, and then it moves its way down to hopefully deliver this baby out through the cervix and out through the vaginal canal. And then you have the perimetrium, which just attaches to the visceral peritoneum, which is that big, large sac that encompasses the whole abdominal region. Okay, the two most important parts are the endometrium, which is where implantation happens, and the myometrium, which is where your contractions happen. So this endometrium right here, that's where your egg, or your fertilized egg, I should say, your zygote, your fertilized egg would implant there, and then it would start to go through these changes. The body would start to start hooking up a placenta a couple weeks later, and then you're attached to the body. The myometrium is in charge of contraction. Now, during menses or during a female's period, the endometrium is actually what is released. So for females, during menses, you have tissue, which is highly vascular, so you have blood in it. That's actually going to be released from the body, and it's going to reset itself for the next time there's a possibility of fertilization and implantation. So the body goes through this every approximately 28 days for most people, and it gets prepared on day 1, really, all the way through. And then if there is no fertilization and no implantation, then it will lose the endometrium and then reset itself again. Okay. We will look at all the chemicals the next time. This is just a look at the vaginal canal, which is the last part here. And that pretty much completes the basic anatomy of the internal anatomy of female reproductive system.